authenticity. Ooh, we're recording. Authenticity is the one thing you absolutely cannot fake. You have to be truthful when you're talking with voters. It is the one thing that voters will absolutely see through. If you are fake, they will not trust you, they will not believe you, and they will definitely not vote for you. So making sure that you have authenticity in your storytelling means that you do actually have to engage in some vulnerability, which might be a little bit scary, but that is the thing that's going to connect you the most with the people that you're engaging with, that you're talking with, and that you're presenting your story to. That authenticity and that vulnerability in sharing is actually going to give you trustworthiness. So the who you are part shows them that you really are who you say you are and that they can trust what you say, right? And then you want to obviously give them some background about who you are. We're going to talk a little bit more about this. The background can be where you come from, who your family is, what kind of expertise you have. But I want to make sure that we're steering away from some things that the who you are part isn't as well. So the who you are isn't your whole life story. You don't actually have to talk about what your grandparents did and your parents did and where you grew up and every place you've lived or anything like that. You just want to hit the highlights that are really relevant to either what gives you the perspective that you have or the expertise on the role, and really shave away the other things that are sort of extraneous, especially because in a stump speech, you typically only have a few minutes. Sometimes if a forum is very generous, they might give you 10 or 15 minutes, but still, knowing where you come from and what you've experienced in your life, you want to only share the things that are the most relevant to the audience understanding who you are, right? So the other things that this is not is your resume or your CV. I know a couple of you said that you've run for office before. Jessica, you said you're a first-time candidate though, right?
Yes, this is my first time.
If you all could turn your camera on, I would really love to see your faces. I realize there might be reasons why you can't, but I particularly like to see your reactions, so I appreciate it if you can. So for you, Jessica, and for those of you who've run before, if you could think about when you were first running for office, did you, and raise your hand, experience imposter syndrome when you were running? You were like, I'm going to run, but I don't know if I can actually do this. This is a big deal.
When I ran a few years ago, 4 years ago for school board, I didn't have a problem with that. I had a problem with people trying to downplay my role in the community. That was my biggest thing. And I kept getting called girl over. They wouldn't use my name. Hey, girl, that kind of thing. And then they said I wasn't a minority because my last name was Bernier. I'm like, do you understand how marriage works? So I found that very odd. Like, just because my name is Bernier now, I'm all of a sudden French and I'm no longer a minority. I don't live a minority life. So those are the odd things, I think, kind of overlapped, I'm like, I don't know how to get rid of this, or, I thought it was strange. I never experienced that before. And, going forward, okay, I can see it very clearly why this stuff was happening. But
I think that the girl thing is always a little bit odd. I am approaching 40 and people like very frequently think I'm much younger than I am because I look young. And it is something that you kind of have to level set with people, right? Like, I'm an adult. You can call me Ms.
Well, I think he was using it in the context of trying to just remove my name and trying to put me down because he's an older man. So he just kept calling me girl over and over. And then it kind of like caught on. Like, I don't understand that. But maybe it was the way it was presented was to take away, my experience. It was a takeaway,
Right.
what I had gone through, that kind of stuff. It was My
You know,
God,
I think that's such a great point. I think later on we can engage in a little bit of conversation about, because we're going to talk about defining ourselves in contrast to our opponents. I think what we can do is have a little bit of a brainstorm about how we address when we are described by our opponents in a way that's not truthful, right? And this is part of the reason why telling your story is so important, because you're the only person that really knows who you are, right? And nobody can take that experience away from you. So you have to be front and center about who you are and what your lived experiences have been. And that is part of your story that you will be telling. And it's especially important if your opponent is trying to say something about you that's not true, right? Or diminish your lived experiences or your identity, right? Okay, so the last thing here is your family tree. We kind of already covered it. You really just don't need to go through so much background, right? The election is here and now. It's about the now and the future. And so I want you to know that, you know, if you're running for the first time, or even if you've run before, you know, having experience is something that you should talk about, but not every person has deep experience in a role that they're trying to move into. So when you're thinking about running for office, the vision and the values and the perspective are just as important as qualifiers as all the positions that you've held in the past and your professional work and the boards that you've served on and all of that, right? So we can think about how people are hired into any position, and you can think about a campaign as a very, very long job interview. You know, we need to be hiring people into these positions, not because they've done it forever, not only because they've done it forever, but also because they have potential to do other things that haven't been done before, right? So when we think about this, what it is part and what it isn't part, if you don't have professional experience that is correlating, then just think about the fact that what you can bring to the table is that vision, is that perspective, and is that potentiality of what could be done with the position. Okay, I have a couple question slides built into here, so I'm going to pause between each of these sections and give you all time to ask questions. I want to know what questions you have. My rule is the only stupid question is the question you don't ask, because you don't learn anything. So please do think about what your questions about that section might be, and you can take yourself off mute or put your hand up, whatever you like. Oops. No questions? None? Okay, lots of shaking heads. All right, let's move on then. Okay, so we covered the who you are part. Now we're going to talk about the why you're qualified part. So ultimately, what voters want to know about you is that you're going to fight for them. And so what they want to know about your qualifiers, whether or not you're qualified, is how you are going to do that. So there are a bunch of different things that come into this. Your values, right? Voters want to know that your values match theirs. That is a qualifier to make you a good fit for this position. So when you're talking about yourself and why you want to do this, it's really important to bring up what kind of values you have, and especially the ones that are shared in your community. So when we go through the workshop part of this, I have a whole big list of values that we can look at and have a good understanding of what's important to you and what kind of values your community shares, so that you can connect those two and talk about them in your speeches. You might be qualified because you have a professional or an educational background, right? So, you know, Jessica, you were saying that not only you went to school in the districts that you're running to represent, but also that you work there and that you have a master's degree. That really tells me something about why you should be on a school district trustee position, right? Like, that is very well connected. But think about the other things that might come into play too. The impact of what you can bring to the role. So sometimes you have a person who's in a position and you want to challenge them for the role, or multiple people are running for an open seat, and you might have somebody that shares your values, but the way you're going to approach the problems is different, or what you're going to prioritize, or the type of impact of the role. You know, you could say, that's great, you filled 10 potholes this year, and that's important because people don't want to damage their car and they should have places to drive. But what about the fact that there's still thousands of people who can't get to work on time? We don't have a public transit system for people who don't have cars, right? That's a whole different impact than just being able to say, you know, I want to make sure potholes are filled, but like, I want to make sure my whole community has access to transportation. Those impact levels are very different, right? So think about the type of impact you could have in your role being a qualifier. The breadth of what you can think is possible is in itself a qualifier. And then also your style. So you may have the same exact values as another person running for office, but your style could be completely different, right? You might be running against somebody who agrees on all the issues with you, but you're a collaborator and they're just doing it for, you know, to check the box. Well, people really need to be involved in their government. If you want to have people experiencing successes of their government, you need to do that in a collaborative way. So your style can really be something that you incorporate into why you're qualified for this position, right? And Brenda Short, I'm thinking especially of what you were saying about your lived experiences, which you've gone through an enormous mountain of challenges, even in the small amount of information that you've shared with us, right? Is that, you know, you grew up in a segregated town, that you went from being unhoused to being a homeowner. That style of the persistence of how you got through that is going to be a differentiating factor for you, right? So bring those in as qualifications. I know how this program impacts people because I was a recipient of it, right? And that is a very different thing than a top-down approach as a bottom-up approach, right? So think about all these ways to bring in your qualifications. I need to make this a little bigger so I can see it for myself here. We want to connect your qualifications also to policy stances. This is a lot about what people get asked about on the campaign trail. What do you believe in? What don't you believe in? What do you oppose? Do you agree or disagree with this vote, platform, you know, suggestion? So bringing in your policy stances is a type of qualification because, like I said, ultimately voters want to know that you're going to fight for them and that you share their values. So making clear to people what you will and won't do with the position. And what you won't do with the position is sometimes equally or even more important than the what you will do with the position, right? So talk about the policies you believe in and will fight for, the policies that you disagree with and will oppose, and connect your policy stances to the community. So I have an example here, and we're going to talk about using I to we stances, which is not just about how it affects you, but how your policies affect the broader community. And the broader community is who is going to be engaging in your votes at the end of the race, right? So those are the people that need to see themselves in your speech. So if you want to say, for example, that I believe in government transparency and accessibility. Show, don't tell. Because we need our government to fix a pothole or access our Social Security benefits, we can't afford to jump through hoops or cut through red tape to get the services we need, right? So that's bringing it from the I to the we. And then you can show and don't tell. So you're going to say, that's why I put my phone number and my email address on my website and on my palm card. So now you're demonstrating the quality that you're talking about, not just talking about it, right? So you can bring up some of these past things too. Michelle, when you're running for city council, you can bring in your experiences about running for school board potentially, or being on the planning commission, and say, I have an idea and a policy that I'd like to implement for urban planning.
Yeah.
And that's why I've been working in the planning commission, because
Yeah, and I never really thought about that. We can go back to everything that I voted on, everything that I've supported, for the community. And I wasn't thinking in those contexts, because I don't think that way. I just think these are things I just do. And I wasn't really planning on running for council, but looking back at all the things that I have done, I'm like, I've got everything. I never really thought about it. I've never really critically, because I'm just a community organizer. I'm an activist for our communities, just what I do. So I don't think that way. And it's been kind of a really hard switch to think, oh my gosh, I did that. Like I went to go to a thing last night to go drop something off. And I walked into the room and I didn't realize how many people I knew, how many connections I had, and how far they went. I just don't think about that. Now I'm realizing it, which is kind of, it's kind of backwards, but it's interesting. But you're right.
I want to take the just out of your sentence.
I know, and I do it all the time. I don't
no, being a community organizer is big and important and powerful, and don't diminish your own words. Right?
And I get that. Some people tell me that all the time. It's just, it's just the way I think, and I need to switch it. I know I do, and I've created so many programs, and I've done so many things. I really don't see it that way. I guess it goes back to my Catholic roots, and you just help to help kind of thing. And I got to get out of that mindset, definitely.
I think it's important sometimes to describe how we change our mindset so that we can shift.
Yeah.
So I used to tell people that I have a terrible memory, but now I tell people that I'm working on my memory.
Well, my thing
like your positive intention is there. So
the thing I've been saying all these years is I'm just a mom helping in the community, and somebody stopped me in a huge meeting and they're like, "You're not just a mom, Michelle. We've all looked at your resume." I didn't expect that. That was kind of
live your values. And I think that is something that gives you an incredible amount of integrity, because you get to actually say, I have done the work because this is what I believe.
Yeah.
And integrity is earned through your actions. And that's a lot of weight, right? When you say something and then you actually have the actions to back it up, that gives you so much weight when you speak. And given that you have all of these experiences where you've been advocating in the community, and like you said, you walked into this room and you see all these people that because you've worked with them, or them from different aspects of your life in the community. This is a really great way. This is a great connection here, because you can tell other people's stories in your story and in your stump speech, right?
I just figured that out this week, because I'm watching another candidate in our community, and he's going around and taking pictures at these businesses, right? And he's just like, "Oh, come by and come see this business," but he's never been involved. And I'm telling my husband, well, this business helped us with Love La Habra, and they fed 500 people, and we called them 4 days ahead of time, and they jumped right in. I don't realize that I have these stories.
Something that you can say when you're running for your city council position is, you can talk about the qualities of your community, because you have the stories that back it up, right? I want to, for example, I want to represent this community because I know that this community is all about taking care of each other. How do I know it? That business owner and I worked to feed X amount of people. This person did that. And it doesn't have to be about you. It can just be about the fact that you see it and acknowledge it and value it in the community. And that gives you a much different perspective. And this goes back to what we were talking about, perspective, right?
That's a wonderful way to put that. Wonderful, because I not that I don't think it's about me, I just don't really want it to be. It's never what I wanted it to be. So it's a good way to put that. We worked on, this program, and I know they're a valuable, employee, and yes, they definitely want to be a part of the community, and they're still here, and they're still asking, and they're still trying.
Yeah. I think that when you're a person who's running for office, when you're the candidate, you need to have a balance between ego and humility. And I think not very many, I think people think of politicians as being egotistical, but you need to actually have an ego big enough to say, I can represent my community. I can do it well. I can get things done. I'm confident that when I act, things will happen, right? That needs to be there, that ego. But there is a deep humility that needs to come with it and balance it. It is never about you as the candidate. It is always about every other person in your community. And if it's about you, you're in it for the wrong reasons, right?
Absolutely.
You didn't even run to get out.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's my downfall, though. I don't know how to marry the two, because I don't ever want it to be about me, because I didn't do any of this stuff alone. None of it.
Right.
So, how do I, we'll talk about it later, I'm sure, but how do I marry the two where I am, not just saying just me, it's like my default,
Right. Well, I think that this third part, connecting your policy stances with the community, might be the strongest part of your story.
Okay.
Right? Okay. And this is really the same slide. So I said it before, if we're talking about government transparency, the show don't tell, right? It's not just about me, it's about the community. So I want to hear from you. I want to make sure that you know how to get in touch with your government when you need it. And that's why I show don't tell, put my phone number and my email address on my website, on my palm card. If you're talking about being a collaborative leader, which Michelle, this definitely is part of what we're talking about, right? Tell a story about how you brought disparate groups together to achieve a goal. Does anybody here think of themselves as a collaborative leader besides Michelle? Because I've been picking on you a little bit. Raise your hand if you do.
I would say yes. Also,
Okay,
collaboratively.
Jessica, Egypt. Egypt, why don't you share with us a story now about how you demonstrated your collaborative leadership?
Well, as being my business is centered around supporting and collaborating with different community members, whether it be through the arts, whether it be through our local stakeholders, barbers, musicians, organizers, institutions like the University of Michigan Flint. My whole life, especially professional life, especially as a community organizer, has been about collaborating with different people for different reasons related to, whether it be to organize around particular issues, community needs, or just like in my business, supporting entrepreneurs and creatives to have a platform that is accessible to them to share their talents, to share their skill set and programs to the community, for free. So I believe those are one of my most important values, is through collaboration, just so people can have access to live in their purpose. And also, I own a bookstore. Back just a little background, that specializes in BIPOC literature. I sell tons of local art, as you could probably see behind me, and also local products. So the entire vision and mission of the store is to get the community to get to know one another in a very authentic way, which is through that cultural representation. So I see this bookstore as my efforts in organizing, but just by doing it in a very organic way.
What I hear as a central thing in there, even though you didn't say those words at all, is economic equity.
Yes.
Those are not platforms that every person gets to get, right? So I think if you were in a forum or a place where you were talking about local economy, you would have, a great story to tell about how your shop is a place where your local economy is thriving and that you're making sure that you're working with other small business owners and entrepreneurs to bring people
Absolutely.
together to give customers the opportunity to buy things that are made in their own community. Right?
Absolutely. And it's also put me in a position to speak on behalf sometimes of the needs and the barriers that many community members and also, minority owned business owners encounter because of the fact that I've worked in a lot of professional spaces, workforce development, social work, politics and government. I often am charged with the responsibility of joining committees and groups. And too many times I've seen very few, Black and brown, women who are at the table with these, top people who are responsible for rolling out economic opportunities for, businesses. So I've had the opportunities to advocate for our needs and be as transparent as I can. In fact, during COVID, when all businesses, of course, were experiencing economic hardship, but especially, and it's been shown, Black owned businesses. So when I'm having a conversation with one of our developers and our philanthropic organizations, I'm having conversations with them and saying, hey, these grants that you are rolling out that are supposed to be directed toward African-American businesses are actually very disconnected to the average business, and therefore this grant money is very inaccessible. So I always say that I left politics to really just go back in a very different way, because owning a business is very political. It's extremely political, but more so in a different way. I've had people who want me to endorse them for different types of opportunities, whether it be for a political seat or maybe for opening a business that I was not in support of. Your integrity is always being challenged as a business owner. And that's something that I take very seriously, because my reputation is tied to my business. And I feel like people expect a certain level of just community awareness from me. So it's been rewarding, but it's also, it comes with a lot of responsibility.
I know you said you don't want to run for office, but I feel like you could, and you should sometime. But
Thank you.
if you haven't thought about it, I'm sure you already have been asked to do this, but there's also great ways to serve the community in a public capacity when you take advantage of some of the appointments that can be done in a political way. And there are a lot of appointments in the economic space that sure could use a voice like yours. I'm a small business owner. My shop is 5 people. I started my first business right before COVID. So many things that you just said resonated with me. And a lot of the help that came with COVID was not available to me, even though we very, very deeply needed it.
Yes.
Right? It was very inaccessible. So I think you could definitely, bring those perspectives, like you said, into a political space where they could do some good. So I hope you think about those opportunities, but I want to thank you for sharing those experiences, because that is the show don't tell, right?
Yes.
That is
Thank
it.
you.
Okay, we have another question slide. So I want to give you all the opportunity to think about what questions you might have about what we just talked about. Jessica, I didn't call on you. You said that you were collaborative too. I want to know if you have something else to add there.
Yeah, no, I was just thinking, I think I'm doing more of the telling than showing. when I'm talking about working collaboratively. So I'm like trying to think of like examples. Like I have worked collaboratively, like developing programs for students as a teaching assistant at UC Irvine. So like I feel like I've been doing the opposite. So
You've
now
been
I'm
telling and not showing?
telling and not showing, yes.
Why don't you give us an example of something that you have been telling and not showing?
I'll say that like, oh, I've worked collaboratively with students to assist them in like signing up for their classes and mentoring them to prepare to enter their first year of college. Where I feel like I should say, you know, I worked with the professor to develop the program where students have the opportunity to work with third and fourth year students to be their mentors to assist them in their first couple years of college. So I feel like I need to like develop that story more. If that makes
I think it's always helpful to say, who did you work with?
sense.
And in what capacity? So they were your equal, you were getting feedback, they were giving you input, whatever that relationship was, to describe it, and then describe what the impact of it was, right? So like, who did you do this with? In what kind of relationships existed in this collaboration? And then what was the impact of your work? And you can maybe frame it that way to be able to tell the story instead of just to show the story instead of just tell the quality that you're sharing, right?
Yes, that makes sense.
Good. Okay. Other questions, thoughts, ways to kind of synthesize? No. Okay. All right, so we're gonna go over the last part here, which is why you are better than your opponent. So this part often gets lost in the shuffle, right? We wanna just talk about how good we are. If we could just convince people that we're so good that we deserve to get this position. But it's really important also to think about the fact that your opponent is going to also say that they're so good at what they do, right? So you need to, and you have the responsibility of, as a candidate, describing where your differences are and how those differences make you a better option than the person people that you're running against. So we're going to talk about contrast, direct and indirect contrast. And we're going to talk about indirect contrast first. And we are actually going to do this in the workshop, how to figure out where your similarities and differences are so that you can identify them and talk about them. Okay, so we'll dig into this a second time when we get into the workshop part. Let's look at some examples of indirect contrast. So you can say 100 true things about you and 100 true things about your opponent, but what you're trying to find out is where those differences are. If you are both people who have lived in your community your entire life, that is not something that's different between you. So even though it's true that you're a lifelong resident of your district, you probably don't want to lead with that because it's not making you any different from the person that you're running against, right? However, if you've been a small business owner and they haven't been one, that is something that's different that you might want to bring into the mix, right? If you are a parent or a grandparent, those are the things that you want to show that are different from your opponent. So we're going to give some examples here of some indirect contrast. And I want to make sure that we know that we don't have to build contrast by being negative, right? Going negative and contrast are different things, right? I can say that I'm a young person, another person who is 70 can say that they're an older person, and those things are true, and neither of them are good or bad. They're just facts, right? So that's not negative by building a contrast. It just shows that we are different in some way. Whereas a negative might be saying like, that person is way too old to be making decisions for my generation. That would be negativity, right? So there are differences, and I want you to feel confident in being able to talk about the contrast between you and your opponents, or whoever you're supporting and their opponents, and campaigning negatively, right? Because this contrast is absolutely essential to political talk, whereas the other is a choice, that you can or can't make, right? So when we talk about some of the indirect contrast, what we're doing here is we're building contrast between the candidate and their opponent without ever saying their opponent's name or potentially anything about their opponent at all. So you can say a fact that is true, and by comparison, it builds a contrast, right? So you can say something like, I'm the only candidate in this race that does blank. Okay, I'm the only candidate in this race who has experienced, racial inequities because I'm not a white person and my opponent is a white person. That is drawing a contrast, and you've never said anything about your opponent. You've really just talked about yourself and how you're different. You can say, I'm the only candidate in this race who has done this or done that. Jessica, you could say, I'm the only candidate in this race who attended this school district, right? Like, that is something that's different about you potentially than your opponents, and that you can say without talking about them. You can say, I have the lived experience of, right? I'm the only person in this race who has been unhoused and has had to deal with raising kids and not having a place to tuck them into bed at night. And that is a really powerful differentiating factor. I think some of you might be able to say this next one. I would make history in this role. We've never had a person of color in this role, a woman of color in this role, right? Like, that's almost every seat ever in the whole US. So that's almost always true if you're a person of color or a woman of color, unfortunately. If I had been in office, I would have voted this way or that way. Again, drawing contrast to actual record of a person who could be an incumbent. That's especially helpful when you are running against somebody who's running for re-election, is to hold them accountable for their voting record, for what they did with the official office. And if you're a first-time candidate or a candidate who is not in the elected position already, you have the luxury of nobody can hold you to it because you haven't had the opportunity to do it yet. So it has that little bonus of they had to do something, and you can critique it, but you weren't in the place to do it. So nobody can critique you, right? So it's like a one-way critique, which is actually pretty protected status. Nobody in this office has ever XYZ. This office needs a person who, blah, 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 whoever you are, whatever your perspective is. So these are all indirect comparisons where you say things about yourself or what the role needs, and you don't ever have to say your opponent's name or describe them directly, right? That's what I'm talking about with indirect contrast. And we can contrast this with direct comparison, right? So this is when you're especially helpful when you're challenging an incumbent, especially because they might have a voting record or a record of what they've done with the office. So if you are running against an incumbent, you should always make sure that you hold them accountable to their record. That is something that is extremely valuable. And really, it's about that is why we have elections, to hold our elected officials accountable. So it is your responsibility running for an office, as your civic duty, to make your opponent accountable to their record, for better or for worse, right? So my opponent was doing this while I was doing that. My opponent voted to do this. I would never vote for that. Or I would have voted a different way. I would have done a different thing. I would have appointed a different person. Show that your actions in a hypothetical way would have been different. You can say our values couldn't be further apart. They believe this and I believe that, right? While we both believe something, we have very different ideas on how to solve it. That is a great way to draw contrast when you actually have similarities, right? Show how you're similar, but then show how you would approach things different, or your perspective is different. When you have my background, you couldn't do this, you wouldn't do this, I would do this, or you know that you can only do this, right? If when a man is acting a certain way, they can get away with things that we as women couldn't get away with, right? Like, if a man walked into a room as an elected official and was wearing sportswear because he just went for a jog, people still somehow take that seriously as a candidate. Whereas if we showed up in a, yoga pants and a sports bra, they would be like, what the hell is this person doing? Like, why? This would not fly, right? So like when you have my background, you wouldn't be able to do this, or you couldn't do this. So that's bringing a contrast that's more direct, right? Do people want to share like one example of something that's coming to mind when you see these? I think I see
These are all really great.
Reaching for the mute button.
These are all really great points, and I like the way you're saying. So I had a big problem with this. I had to put together a letter that talks about me as a candidate, because I had to go for an appointment first, and that, so there is definitely differences in me and the other candidates, absolutely. And for me, I think it's just my personality. I felt bad pointing these things out, but they're true.
If you feel uncomfortable being this direct with a contrast, use the sandwich method.
Okay.
Say something nice about the person, say the contrast, say something nice about the person, right?
Okay. Uh-huh.
Although my opponent is a very nice person, I would have voted differently from them. That doesn't make them good or bad.
Okay.
That means we are different people.
That helps, because being on a commission now and working with these people and knowing that I'm going to be working with these people afterwards, whether I get put on the, the dais or not, I want to keep it the same. I don't want to be nice, but I want to be truthful.
I think it's also, important to acknowledge that that is a reality for a lot of government positions and elected offices, that the people that you run against and have to defeat in an election are people that you will still have to work with when you beat them, right?
Yeah.
So those are true realities, and you have to decide what kind of relationship that you want to have before, during, and after the election, right? So I know most people, when they go in, don't want to go in trashing their opponent. They want to be kind and respectful and earn it on their own merits. But, you can be polite, and you can be truthful, and you can be brutally honest with your differences. And all of those things can be true.
And I figure, I can also do a mix of that though, right? There's some things that, if you're gonna constantly recuse yourself out of stuff, that's your record. That's what you've brought to the table. I can bring that out.
Absolutely. Wait, tell me more about the recusing.
So all the important positions in our city right now, in the last 2 years especially, we have 2 commissioners and 2 council members that have removed themselves completely off of every vote. Completely.
So they're just not voting, or they have to recuse themselves for like ethics reasons or something?
They're not voting.
Okay, so they're just like voting present?
Or
they're just like
abstain
for meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Which one?
Well, so they'll either won't show up, they'll abstain, or they'll just say present.
So I think that that's a really great direct thing to go after, right?
Okay.
You elected a person to represent you, but they've decided that they only want to 80% represent you because they're recusing themselves or voting to abstain 20% of the time. I will be a person that 100% of the time represents you.
Yes, okay, that's a good way to put that.
I will be there to take a vote.
And you can go by our records, because we're all voting pretty much on the same thing. If you go back to my record, I've never recused myself in 6 years.
That is
I've never had a conflict of interest. I've never, nothing like that. I'm not taking any money. There's no reason for me to do that.
That is a huge, huge contrast to draw.
It is.
My opponents are recusing themselves left and right because they have conflicts of interest, or they don't feel like they need to be your voice on the council. In 6 years, I have never once recused myself or missed a vote. That is a huge contrast.
Okay.
Huge.
So I can say those things, and it's just facts.
not only can you say those things, you absolutely must say those types of things. Maybe that one is not the most important to your constituency. And so you may want to decide, like, how important is this? But
Well,
in
there was
general, voters want people who show up to do the job that they ask them to do.
Yeah, there was a lot of controversial situations in our city with like distributions, marijuana distributions, you know, bring them into our community, you know, our alcohol and tobacco and firearms, you know, the licenses in certain areas, all these things, all these important things that the city is definitely paying attention to, they're not voting on. And the biggest one was a development in the city. They had nothing to say. And I went over it minutely in our meetings. So the huge contrasts.
Great. So I think you have a lot of fodder then to show where the differences lie between you and the people that you're running against. And this absolutely needs to be something that you put into your stump speech and the way you talk to voters and the way you convey who you are, because it's going to be the who you are, why you're qualified, and why you're different than your opponents, why you're better than your opponents. And that third piece is the piece that, you know, this is exactly what we're digging into now. And it sounds like you have some real differences that would be evident to voters if you talked about them.
So what's been coming up in the last few years is, of course, because I'm a woman, she's difficult. She, you know, nobody likes her, that kind of stuff. So that I like your sandwich method. So that kind of fights back on that whole, you know, and that'll just stay. That's just how our community is really old. So it's like, you know, it's how they do things. And of course you find me difficult because I'm the one that is doing the hard work and asking the hard questions. That's
you can also, you can address these critiques head on, right? You can say, look, some people have tried to critique me as somebody who's difficult, but ultimately, do you want somebody who's a pushover in this role? Or do you want somebody who is going to actually stand up when what is happening in our community is not in our best interest? I'm not just going to let people steamroll us into having a community that's not what we want or need.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, I like that.
Brenda Short, what are you not saying? Because you're physically covering your mouth.
I am.
You're like,
I feel for her because, you know, running for city council, my campaign manager, she was a great person, but
I'm hearing the beginning of the sandwich now.
Yeah.
She was, I don't think she was the greatest campaign manager for myself because she told me to be non-aggressive during my election. And because she didn't want me to be the angry Black woman.
I want to ask you a question.
Sure.
Where did I say to be aggressive?
You said to be aggressive because you want be passionate. Be passionate.
Those are different things, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I'm not telling you not to be aggressive. I wouldn't tell, like.
Well, everybody was aggressive. I'm like, there was, and what threw my election off, there was 9 of us. All of them was men except for 2 Black women. And as I told everybody before, the other Black woman, she was a Republican, but she just put her name and her face out there. She never showed up to any events. So, and her first name was Brenda as well. So yeah, that knocked my election out of the water because I would always.
Her name was Brenda as well?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's why some of my votes went to her, because both of our names started with Brenda. And then we were both Black women.
Do you know that's actually like a very well-established political tactic? Yeah. It was one of the reasons that John F. Kennedy won one of his earlier elections. he had an opponent. I can't remember his name. It was like Michael Rossi or something like that. And in order to confuse voters, he recruited another person named Michael Rossi to get on the ballot too, so that people didn't know which one they were voting for.
Right.
And it split the vote and gave him the win. So
Yeah, and we don't have like clean voting. We have ranking voting
you have
here in
ranked choice
Minnesota,
voting.
and that sucks.
Yeah.
Because
You probably had another challenge too, which is just like trying to figure out how many votes you need to win, because there's only two places in the world that that use that methodology like consistently in a way where we can, as political scientists, like actually use it to calculate algebraic equations to figure out how you win that. And that's in Ireland and Italy. And there's only like one way to figure it out mathematically. So not a lot of people know about that methodology. I can share it with you offline if you email me.
Okay.
But, you know, in a crowded race like you're describing, especially when you have somebody else with a similar name or the same first name as you do, it is incredibly important to draw all the distinctions that you can between you and among all of your opponents.
Yeah.
So
it was very hard. This right there where you're explaining how to separate myself, and I was like, okay, I can separate. I can't say I was the only homeless person because there was a Latino man who was homeless. I can't say I was the only grandparent because there was an older Black man who was, and every similarity I have, I mean, I can't even say I was the only Black woman running. It was just like, I was just stuck in the middle of a race that was not, and then we had the ranking voting where I mean, I came high in number one, and then I came second in number two, and it just threw everybody else off because they didn't know, if they didn't remember my last name, some of those votes went to a lady who she didn't do anything. Like these guys put a few signs up around the neighborhood and put her name on the ballot.
So I think for you, when we get into, I mean, you're going to be in a totally different race this time. If you're running for mayor, it's not going to be a multi-way ranked choice situation, or do you have ranked choice for your mayoral race too?
We do.
You do? Do you think it'll be a crowded race?
Oh yeah, because this last election was 18 people. And it was all, and it was only 2 women, but they were non-African, well, non-color. But yeah, and we thought one of those was gonna rank, but they went back to the same mayor. So it's kind of crazy.
In the workshop part, we can pay more. I would encourage you to pay more attention to the part that we're going to talk about, which is called the Tully box, which actually identifies where these contrasts lie. Okay, so pay attention to that part when we get to it. I do want to make sure we have enough time to get into our workshop part, so I'm going to kind of just scoot us along now. So we went through these major parts of the campaign message. So we are going to work now, move over to the workshop so we can start actually putting together some of this information that we had. What I would encourage you to do, I'm going to stop sharing my screen here, and I'm going to drop a link to a Google document in the chat here. And what I would love for all of you to do is just make a copy of it, and then you can type away all your answers and you can take that away with you. Okay. Please tell me that you actually can look at the document and see what I shared with you. And you can make a copy. Brenda,
I send a link to, I don't really use Google Docs. I'm a person.
You can
so send,
copy and paste
I send a link to my work
or print it or whatever. But if you do want to use the Google Doc version, you can make yourself a copy and then you can type your answers right into it. And this will give you a great framework to start from. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again, and then we are going to walk through this together. So let me just get this fit and sharing, but just know that you all have your own version of this and that you can work on it too. Okay. So there are a number of different exercises in here, and these will give you all of the kind of raw data points to draw from to build out your message. So the first section here is called Finding Your Why. And this is going to give you the why you're running. A lot of this is going to pool into the who you are and why you're qualified, okay? So we'll go through these in a minute. I'm just going to go through the overview of the doc first. Here is that giant list of values that I mentioned that we would look at. So if you're not sure what your values are, or even what values are, here is a list of a whole bunch of different values. These are clickable checkboxes, so you can check off the ones that are important to you. I know when I look at this list, I can say that family is extremely important to me. But when I look at things like faith, I didn't grow up in a faith community. It's not that high on my list. That might be different from you. There's no good or bad to these. It's just you find the ones that work best for you. Fitness is like not that high on my values list. Probably should be higher than it is. But learning is very high on my list. I think that we should learn and keep learning, and we have something to learn from everybody and every experience we have. So I would choose that. So you can go through these, and this might help you really understand your values and how to talk about your values in your message. It is a very long list. Then we have the story of self. So the story of self is a format where you can describe some of the challenges that your community has and what choices you have and what the outcome of those choices are, in order to demonstrate to people that what you are going to ask them to do, which is to vote for you or support you on the ballot, or maybe give you money or volunteer, or if you're not the candidate, to support the person that you want them to support in those ways. It will help them understand what problems they are solving by taking that action, and what outcome that what they can do to create certain outcomes in their community. So we'll go through this a little bit more. And then we have the Tully box, which is the thing that we were just kind of going over, that will help you draw distinctions between you and your opponents. And the Tully box is a box, sometimes you'll hear this called the communications box. And it asks 4 questions. What are we going to say about ourselves? What are they saying about themselves, meaning your opponents? What are they going to say about us? And what are we going to say about them? So I think, Michelle, were you the one that was saying that your opponent called you a girl? That's right, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're
So
trying to figure out how to copy this, so give me a second. So go ahead.
if you need to know when you're in it, you hit File, and then there's a Make a Copy button here.
Okay.
And then you can work off of it yourself.
Okay.
You might need to rename it, but yeah, that's how
Okay.
you do it. And I see you all up here, your lovely little serpents, and I don't know what an ifrit is, but here you are. So one of the things that you would put about this is, if you have the same opponent, what are they going to say about us? That's this box. What are they saying about us? They're going to call us a girl. That's going to try to diminish your age, experience, you know,
Or-
so something that you
Or
might,
difficult, yeah.
they might say that you're difficult. Right. So you need to be aware not only of how you want to present yourself in a great light, but some of the critiques that you might get, right? There could be actually like very legitimate critiques that people have about you that have nothing to do with your age. But, you know, if you did serve in a position before and you took a vote that's on the record and your opponent opposes that, you know, that's something that they might say about you, and it's going to be true. And you just have to make sure that your message is durable against all of the negative things that they could say about you, right?
Okay.
So we'll go through this more. Let us, though, start at the top. And I just want to confirm before we start at the top,
Okay. All right.
do all of you have now your own copy of this in a way that you can start putting your answers in? I
Can I
see
do
Brenda
it?
Short nodding. I do not see anything from Brenda Williams. Are you in there, Brenda Williams?
We're still
Yeah,
trying.
in fact, I made a copy, but I got to go back to it now so I can type. But I made a
Great.
copy.
Yes, please type in your own version of it. That would be great. Jessica, are you good?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Michelle?
We're still working on it. We're doing it right now.
Okay. All right, we'll give you a second there. Egypt, do you have your own copy now? You're on mute. You might be with a customer. If you need a minute, that's fine. Karen and Catherine, you can feel free to do this too. And I hope you will follow along. Okay, I think Egypt is probably a little busy, but I just want to make sure.
I am doing it, but did you say to download it as a Word document?
Well, I'm encouraging you to create a copy in Google Docs, but if you're not a Google Docs person, you can put it in
Google
whatever
Docs. I'm
format
not Google Docs. So download it into Google Docs. Okay,
Yeah, you just hit the file button and click make a copy.
done.
And it will duplicate this document, and then that will give you a copy that you can edit and put your own answers into.
Oh,
Okay.
okay. Thank you.
So I'm sure this first question, if you've run for office before or are doing it right now, is one that you get a lot. So I don't think we have enough time to talk about even one example on every single question. But what I want to emphasize on this first one is the why you're running should really talk about what is that moment that catalyzed your decision from I'm just a citizen who's out here in the world to no, I am going to run for this office.
Is that right?
So
Where does that go?
Yeah, right there. That's it.
Okay, but I can't see you guys when I'm down here. I can hear you.
do people have questions? I'm not sure who's
And I
talking.
can also click it over one. Takes you back to that.
Karen, I think you're not on mute, so we can hear other people.
There's nothing, there's nobody in here, so it's not me.
Who is that then? Somebody have some background going on?
It's me and my husband. He's just trying to show me.
Oh,
how to do
okay.
this. Sorry. Okay, I'll mute us and then, but I'm looking.
Okay, great. Thank you. So Brenda Short, why don't you give us an example of what was that catalyzing moment that made you decide I want to run for mayor?
For mayor or city council?
Well, you're running for mayor now, so why don't we hear about
Well,
what you're doing now? Because this will be more relevant to what you're going to be talking about in the immediate future, right?
yeah. That moment was when I realized that the executive mayor was passed. I knew at that moment that, oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, wrong button. I knew at that moment that when the current mayor was reelected, things were not going to change. Public safety was not going to be his priority. And me as a African-American mother of 3 Black young men and being an ex-cop, ex-officer.
You were a police officer?
Yes, ma'am.
Wow.
I worked on SWAT for a city, Iowa City.
I feel like you've lived like 4 different lives. Is that
I've lived, you know what? It's so funny that one Jewish lady wrote a story about me because we worked together at the hospital. And I used to tell her, you know, when we had downtime, I told stories about myself. You know, she would always ask me about stories. And she wrote a book about me. And then there's part of my life in a book, a famous book that Oprah Winfrey has endorsed years ago called The Down Low. Part of my story is in that book. So a lot of my history is out there with my name on it. Well, not my first name, but not my physical.
Egypt, do you sell the book, The Down Low, in your store, and do you ship? Because I feel like I want to read that.
Oh, I can tell you what it's about, but
Okay.
Tell us.
So, let's bring us back here. So you said the moment that catalyzed your decision was that when you realized that the person who's serving in the role right now is not going to prioritize what you want to prioritize. That's what I heard.
And that is public, yeah, and that is public safety.
And whatever that
And-
issue is, public safety. Okay, so why you're running is the person who holds that position right now is not prioritizing what I know our community needs to prioritize. Boom. That's what I want you to fill in this section, okay? So everybody think about their own experiences. And Brenda Williams, you're gonna think about Karen's experiences, okay? And Egypt, you didn't tell us any particular person, but if you could imagine a person in your community that you wish was on your ballot this year, I want you to just put that person in the forefront of your mind while you're filling this out. Obviously, you can't decide for them what made them run for office, but try to fit it in as much as you can. Okay, next you're going to talk about your unique leadership traits. What I see, especially with the women candidates that I work with, is that women lead in a pretty different way than most men lead, right? Women often lead from the back. Women often lead as servant leaders. Not every woman, everybody's different, right? We're not all one thing. But think about the leadership traits that you have that are different from the other people that are in the race with you. And then when we talk earlier about the show Don't Tell, love to have an experience of how you exemplified those traits so that you can show and not just tell people what those are. We're going to ask you to think about how other people describe you. So if we talk to your boss, your colleague, your friends, and ask them to describe your leadership style, what would it be? And if you don't know, you can go ask them. You can go ask them. If you're not sure how other people think of you, then you can ask. And again, we're going to show, not tell. So when you're thinking about these descriptive words about who you are, you want to connect them to an actual example of how you demonstrated those values, okay? What do you bring to the table that this position needs? Jessica, you're nodding. I feel like something's right there on the tip of your tongue for you.
Yes. I was gonna say when you were talking about the opponent piece, so I do have an opponent in the race, but he's not from this district. He hasn't lived in Anaheim this as long as I've had, and I believe I'm uniquely qualified for this seat because I've actually been a student in that district, and I've also taught or tutored students in that district, so I understand firsthand their experiences. So that's what I bring to the position.
So what you're bringing is a deep connection to the institution. Perfect. Great. Okay. Now it's important to think about not only all of these wonderful things that you're going to say about yourself, but how do they actually connect to your audience? So think about who your voters are, or your candidates' voters are, and how they connect. I know we spent a lot of time earlier talking with Egypt about her role as a business owner and in economic development and representation, economic equity. That could be an audience that she has true integrity with, that she can connect with when she's talking about what kind of leadership is necessary for her community, right? So if the people, Jessica, I'm assuming that a lot of the people who would be voting in your race are actually probably parents of students in the school district.
Yes.
So thinking about, connecting your personal attributes to them, you can say, look, I've been in your kids' shoes in that building, but also I know what their needs are because I'm interacting with them now, right? Michelle, I'm sure you can come up with some of those things too with the people who are interested in who your city councilors are. You've dealt with a lot of them by being involved in your community and in their city government before, so.
Yeah.
Great. So think about what you're going to say about yourself and how it connects to those people. Another thing to think about is just, do you have anything really new and different to offer, unique to offer that is missing?
Unique like how? Like what would you say?
Sorry, I'm just moving on to the next bullet point, but if you're asking me about that, I mean, I don't know who is on your city council now. So perhaps you're the first Latina to come into your city council, right? You're like, I have a really unique perspective because of, you know, obviously I'm a white person and like I don't live with this experience, so you could tell me better than I can. But I know when Jessica was talking, she was saying that her district is 52% Latino and she speaks Spanish, right? So if, for example, like that's an innovative way to approach problems, is from that multicultural lens, and a lens of like, I have an understanding of what families who may not have English as their first language are experiencing, right? So your innovative way to approach problems might be, I'm going to make sure that everything we do is bilingual, period. Otherwise, we're leaving half of our students and parents out, right?
Well, that's
So,
definitely our community too. We're 68% minority.
yeah, so you might have something that's really unique or innovative to bring to the table that isn't there with your present leadership. And if you're not the candidate, think about what your candidate or the people that you're supporting brings to the table that is unique. And that's where this goes. Obviously, we already kind of went over this. I'm not going to go over this too much, but you've got your big old checklist of values. So everybody's going to come up with a different list. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but if we could just shout out the one that screamed at you right away, like, this is my value. I believe in this. Michelle, why don't you start us off? You're on mute, my friend.
Sorry, I'm trying to get back to the list.
It's also shared on the screen. So there's like a,
Okay. Let me-
any one of these.
So this is the part, what are my values
Yep,
for myself, for the community? Just
for you.
For me, my values is my family. My
Family.
family and friends. Yeah.
Great. Karen, I'm going to call on you too as well. Karen, what's a value from this list that you hold very highly?
All right, so hold it. Because I checked quite a few.
Oh, good. She's doing it right along. Great.
Ones that I hold the greatest: diversity, humanity, openness, honesty, strength.
Great. I'm going to cut you off there because I don't want to spend a ton of time, but it's awesome that you're coming up with different things. Catherine, what about you?
I'll go top three: family, respect, and patience.
Awesome. Brenda Williams. If you're talking, you're on mute. No, you're not talking.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Naturally, family.
Family.
Connection, creativity, diversity.
Great. Okay. So now we've heard a couple things more than once, which is cool. All right. Who else hasn't gone yet? Brenda Short.
I would say relationship. I think a relationship between anyone, regardless of diversity or whatever, that is the strongest bond you can have with anyone. It can be easily broken. And so that's why I picked relationship, because I have relationships with a lot of Republican friends who supported me, even though I ran Democratic. And a relationship is something different that you hold between you and another party. So
Great. Okay. Did we miss anybody?
I haven't. I chose my top three were teamwork, encouragement, and caring.
That's so fun. It's also so interesting for me to hear these things because they are so different from person to person. And I think we lost Egypt, so we'll give her a pass on this. All right, great. So these are some things that when you're talking about who you are, think about the leadership qualities, the values that you thought of, and how you're going to weave them in by showing how you value those things and how you demonstrate those qualities. Okay, the story of self is a little bit challenging to understand at first. So I think the best thing to do here is actually just give an example. And I think it's going to come a little bit more naturally here. So I'm going to pick on Brenda Williams. I know you're not the candidate here, but you're supporting somebody else. So I would love to know, what is a challenge? And man, being from Flint, we could probably just pick right away with what of your challenges in your community is. But why don't you tell me one of the challenges that's in your community?
It's the lack of trust in our governance, in our system.
Okay,
Representation.
so mistrust.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a huge problem, right? If people don't have faith in their government, that is a really big community problem. Okay, so that's the challenge. We've identified a challenge in the community. The people have lost faith in their leaders. They've lost trust in their leaders. So you have choices. And so you're supporting Karen. And I'm assuming that Karen has opponents. Yes?
Yes. For
Okay.
the sake, well, please wait. I'm being politically correct. For the sake of this training, yes, although I will tell you this, that yes, I am supporting her as a woman and as someone who I believe can give us different a different approach or outlook in our community. And yes, she has an opponent who also I am very well connected to, who has been both a city council person, a state representative, and then she beat Karen by 220 votes in the last election, which that was her first time running, and having won on the basis of the water issue.
Right.
Flint.
Okay. Okay.
So that's the choice. That's the
The
choice.
choices, right. So the choices are, you have these two candidates and they're different. And we're going to know how they're different because we're going to go through the Tully box and we're going to find all the contrasts, right? And ultimately, those differences are going to produce different kinds of outcomes. So let's just give an example of one outcome that could happen if Karen is in, and one outcome that could happen if the other person was in. So I'm assuming you're supporting Karen because you've identified this challenge as mistrust in government. I'm assuming you're supporting Karen because she's a trustworthy person, right?
I believe so. If I could just say this as an aside, when she was first elected as mayor, I did not know her. In fact, the person who's the mayor now, I've had a long-term relationship, and I am not supporting Karen because I'm mad at the other person. Again, I'm looking at the governance of our community. My decision.
Yeah.
Karen, after talking with her, I felt her heart of commitment to the people of this community. And I felt that she was more inclined, when I use the word creativity, I think of creativity is more to me defined as being able to think outside the box as we address emerging issues as well as issues that we have not yet overcome in this community.
So I think what I'm hearing there is that the choices are, we could try the same things that we've tried before, or we could be really creative about making sure that the problems in this community are taken care of.
Yes,
And that's about perspective,
yes,
right? And we were talking earlier about it. Your qualifications don't have to come from your resume. They can come from your perspective or your approach.
yes.
And that is also a qualification for office. So your choice is, you could choose to support a person who's been mayor before. We know exactly what they're going to try to do to change this community because they've tried it before. If you're happy with that status quo, that is one of the outcomes that you could come with. But if you're not happy with the status quo, you could elect Karen, because Karen is thinking way more creatively about how we're going to solve our problems. And I trust her to actually solve the problems that we have in our community. And we need that because people don't have faith in their government right now. So those are the choices.
Elaine, again, Karen was the mayor, and then you had certain people, how would you say, making making accusations, because as you know, we got a lot of monies that came in here, that the monies did not even come to the city. They went to the Community Foundation and United Way. The city.
Okay, so I'm just going to pause you because I want to make sure that we actually cover like what's in the exercise and not get too deep in the weeds with this race. Okay. But honestly, you can take this, and after we talk, you can spend as much time as you want on exploring that. But that's just one example of the outcome options for how you answer the story of self. So you have the challenge, people are losing faith in their government. You have a choice, these two candidates. Let's just say, for the sake of the exercise, that your choice is, I really trust this person, and I don't know if I can trust that person, right? Those are the potential outcomes, and that's the choice. The outcome is, we're going to have restored faith in government because this is a trustworthy person who's running. And your choice over here is, we might have the same problems in 2 years or 4 years at the end of the term because we don't know if we can trust this person. And so your ask is, and this is the fourth part, please support candidate A because they're trustworthy. And at this point in time where people don't have faith in their government, we need somebody we can trust in this office, right? That we can put our faith into. So that's an example of how you can fill this out. So as you all are thinking about your race and what the challenges are in your community, what you want to put in there is what the challenges are, the choices that voters have. And typically in this scenario, their choices are the different things that candidates on their ballot are going to do or say or fight for. The outcome is, if that candidate had their way, what is the result of that? And then the ask is for their vote, their money, their volunteer time, whatever it is that your campaign needs in order to win. Probably all three. And you can ask for everything you need. You should always ask for everything you need as a candidate on your campaign. You should be asking people for their vote and thanking them. You should be asking for their money and thanking them. And you should be asking them to volunteer and thanking them. Okay, so these are the things that will really help you understand what topics and policies to talk about too. Because as you're thinking about your policy stances, I want to go to Michelle on this because the city council actually has like many different issues, but I'm sure you have a couple like at the top of your list of what is it actually that your community is dealing with right now?
Right now, we're dealing with, we just passed affordable housing mandate in our community, and it came through the planning commission to us, and then I was on our GPAC for a general plan revision for the next 10 years. And I was the sole person pushing for affordable housing and inclusionary housing. Well, it went to council and council approved it, but now since it's shifted by a vote, they're trying to pull it back.
Okay. Okay, Brenda, you're just waving your hands over there.
That happened here. And the sad part about it is Oh, the sad part about it is,
Not that it's great that it happened in your community, but great that you have this connection and we can do this.
I am so sad because it passed like 98% of voters voted for affordable housing.
Yeah.
And it passed, and the city council did not talk about it at all yet.
They didn't.
But
Huh?
nope. And the crazy part about it is the Senate came in and vetoed. It happened in Minneapolis, and it passed in Minneapolis and St. Paul. So we're like twin cities. And the Senate just vetoed all the votes. So it's not even going to pass. So you need to be very, very careful about this, why they're probably not talking about it. And I talked about this in my last training with someone. It happened in a lot of states that they passed this Affordable Housing Act, and someone down the line higher than the city council came in and vetoed it. So why they're probably not talking about it is because they know it's going to be vetoed and it's going to be put in the news.
Here in California, there's only 3 other cities that have approved for affordable housing and inclusionary housing. And one is Anaheim and one is Santa Ana. And we are the 3 cities that have the most minorities and that our income is the lowest in all of Southern California. So even though we're not as big as Anaheim, Garden Grove, or Santa Ana, we still have their numbers. So the reason why they're not talking about it right now is because they're saying that we will not get developers to come in. We have no problem with that. Our RENA numbers, which I don't know if you guys know what RENA numbers are. RENA numbers are your numbers that each city is supposed to require for affordable housing. Our numbers are the smallest of all of California. So there's no reason to fight it. Now the new council members come in.
Sorry, Michelle, I gotta cut you off.
Yeah, but that's an issue. You know, that's something that I fought for all these 5-6 years that I've been a planning commissioner, and this new council member and this new commissioner that went to council are fighting it now. And it's like, it took years to get there.
Michelle, we can talk about it offline because I know you just connected with me on my page. Yeah. So I saw that. So we can talk about it offline so we can go forward, because I know we are here for this reason, so I want to stay on topic.
But of course,
I'm excited that we have minimum two women in this training who know so much about how to fight for affordable housing in their community, because we need it so badly everywhere.
We do. So, oh yeah, and especially in California, it is really bad. But you know, the point is,
I live in a horribly unaffordable place, and affordable housing is such a big issue here too. And I'm nowhere near you all. So, I mean, we're like in 3 totally different places in the US. This is an absolute national issue, right? So.
Yeah, oh yeah. And in my neighbor, it's interesting that we're having this argument, but this is something that, you know, the developers are trying to fight against. So what has been dug out is it's the real estate association. So it's like, I think what I've been experiencing, you know, to our point is we need more education in the community.
Okay, so I'm just going to take one way that we can talk about housing on this issue.
Okay.
Examples, right? Which I heard that 98% of the voters wanted this affordable housing thing, right? In Minneapolis, right? Okay. And Michelle, I know you're talking about your community too, but I'm just going to do one example.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So the council has a mandate from the voters, but they're not taking action, right? So that's your challenge. It's like they are not listening or prioritizing the things that the people who actually live here want to be done on their behalf, right? Yeah. So your choice is status quo. Do you want nothing to be done about housing affordability? Or you get a counselor who listens to you. Sorry, this is actually, you're running for mayor. Mayor who listens and will fight for housing afford. I write that phrase a lot, so Google wants me to autofill it. Okay, so the outcome is what? If we don't do anything about affordable housing, you know, candidate A, who is not you, Brenda Short, is the status quo person, and people in our community are going to get pushed out.
Exactly.
They're going to be priced out. And, you know, we already have like a homelessness crisis in the US, right? Homelessness could go up. And we could say that people will be housing insecure.
Yep.
Right? This is just one example, obviously. And then candidate B, that's going to be you, Brenda. Okay. I'll listen and work to make sure that one, the voters' will is done. And two, we're addressing housing affordability. Boom. So the ask is, go for you. Okay, here's just one. So I want you all to think about the challenges, the reason why you're running, the challenges that exist in your community that you're running to face, to take on, to tackle, to change. And this is the format of how you can use this story of self to talk about it. So when you're giving those stories about your community, right? This is also a really wonderful place to pull in those individual stories of other people in your community. So when you're thinking about people who could be priced out, do you know somebody who's been priced out? You're talking to the folks in your community, right? So when you're saying the status quo means that so-and-so who used to be my neighbor had to move and take her kids out of the school system that we're in because they're priced out. Or, you know, we have elderly people who can't afford to stay in their homes. Or we have young people who want to start families and they're delaying that by 5 or 10 years because they can't afford to buy a house for a family. So this is when you can actually pull in the individual stories that you're gathering when you're talking to people in your community and make it move from that I or me to we, right? Because you're talking about you and why you're running, but you really need to be talking about your community and how these issues affect them and the outcome it could have on real people in your real community, okay? And then the ask should always be a hard ask. So you need to ask for the things that you actually need to win your election, right? And that's typically money, volunteers, and votes. So if you're in a room full of potential voters, you need to ask for their votes. If you're in a room full of people who could donate to your campaign, you need to say, I need you to contribute to this campaign so I have enough money to talk to every voter in this community. Or I can't knock every door in my community on my own. I really need you to volunteer so that you can help me talk to your neighbors about why this race is so important. Can you sign up on Saturday at 3 o'clock and knock doors for the campaign, right? So make the ask a hard ask, something that is tangible and is connected to the story of why you're running. This is going to make it both personal, but also widely connected to the people in your community. So you can do this with as many of the challenges that you're hoping to tackle in your race as possible. And then when we're talking about figuring out what values your community has and what values, what's important to the voters in your community, you might order this in your stump speech or your issues so that the things that are going to resonate the most with the people that are going to vote in the election come to the top. And if you have 15 minutes, you might tell 3 stories. But if you only have 2 minutes or 3 minutes, you're only going to tell the one that's resonating with the most amount of people, that falls highest on their list of cares and worries when you're talking with them, right? Okay, and this is the most fun. If you have a multi-candidate race, you're going to have to add more columns here. I'm going to bring this down a little bit so we can hopefully look at, oh no, that's too small. 100, come on. Wow, you're really not helping me, Google. And I'm back to where we are. Okay, so the Tully box is finally what you've already built out, this whole first box, because you just wrote pages and pages about what you're going to say about yourself, right? All of the true things that you could say about yourself, who you are, why you're running, your values, your unique leadership skills, the things that make you you and are wonderful. And now we want to compare this to what your opponents are going to do. So your opponents, if they're smart, are going to do this exercise too. And they're going to figure out all the great things about themselves that they could say too. So what you need is something that both contrasts you, but is also durable against anything that they might say. So Brenda Short, you were saying that you actually had a lot in common with some of the other candidates in your race, right? So you're not going to lead by saying, you know, I was an unhoused person if another candidate can say the same thing, right? You might not lead, Michelle, if you have more people in your race that are running who are also Latino and can speak Spanish, like that might not be the thing that you can really run on if your opponents are similar to you in that way, right? But they may not have had the professional experience that you've had being a planner, being in the planning council. Sorry, am I saying that right? The planning commission, sorry. You know, when Jessica's talking about her race, she might actually be the only person who's running who's speaking Spanish, but she can definitely say she's the only one who went to that school district. So those are the things we want to say about ourselves that can't be things that they are saying about themselves, right? So when we think about filling out the other sides of this box, we need to think about what are the positive things that our opponents are going to say about themselves too, right? So Jessica, why don't we go to your race for a second, and can you tell me some things about how your opponent is talking about themselves?
Yes. So my opponent is a teacher outside of the district. I believe, I want to say Hacienda Heights.
Okay.
He is also a union leader in Hacienda Heights as well.
Okay. Are you in the teachers union?
I'm not a teacher. I was a avid tutor, which was a part-time job when I was in college. But my dad is in the union. He is a current classified employee for the district. He's worked there for 15 years.
So this is a perfect example, right? So here's just one example, okay? We found something that is a contrast. So what Jessica can say is that she comes from a union family. That really takes away the fact that her opponent is a union leader, right? He can be like, I'm a leader in my union, and she can be like, I come from a union family too, and unions have been a positive force in both of our lives. And it really takes away the sting of that point that he can make, right? Because he's definitely going to talk about the fact that he's a union member and that she's not, right? And he might say even, I'm a teacher. And she can say, okay, well, you're a teacher, but you're not in the district. I'm helping the students in this district now. Okay, so when we're thinking about our message and what we're going to say, we need to think about it in the context of all the things that are being said by all the candidates. And so we want to build the messages that are both showing how the candidates are different and how you are better and different than your opponent, especially in a crowded race. This is so important. But we also have to acknowledge that you and your opponent could say things about yourselves that are the same, right? So what we could say about Jessica is that she works in education, and what they are saying about themselves is that they work in education. Well, that's a moot point. You can both say it and it's true, but it's not going to win you any points, and it's not going to win them any points, right? So it's kind of silly to talk about it. Unless they make it a real point and you're like, okay, well, me too. What else?
Yeah, so
Like,
he kind of has me. So I used to work in education. So was advocate for 4 years and a teaching assistant for 2. And now I work in local government as a policy advisor. So he is still a teacher. So
Okay.
he has tried to use that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If I was advising him, I would definitely tell him to say that because you can't say it, right? So you need to put yourself in their shoes a little bit and think, if I were that candidate, how would I describe myself and how would I contrast myself with me? Okay, so that's how you fill this out. And if you come across things that are similar, what you can do is just actually cross them out. You're going to be like, okay, well, we're not going to lead with that because it's too similar,
Yeah.
right? Boom.
Yes.
You're not going to lead with this because it's too similar, right? But what you can say about yourself that he can't is you currently work with that student, that school students.
Mhm.
And does he speak Spanish?
I don't believe so. No.
Boom, he can't say that, right?
Mhm.
So there we go. You're going to emphasize these things. He's probably still going to emphasize this about you.
Yes.
Right?
I have heard it.
So there we go. That's a little bit about how to do that.
Okay.
So I realize that we're getting really close to our time, the end of our time together. That is actually the end of what I wanted to share with all of you.
Elaine,
Very last sheet. Yes.
Elaine, you can take your time. Just take.
Okay.
And
Take my-
there's no rush now. We don't have anything after you now.
Okay,
So take
great.
your time.
I'll take maybe 5 or 10 more minutes in case we have questions, and then we'll wrap
Yeah,
up.
just take your time.
Okay. So we have talked about all of the different elements of what is in this stump speech. So now you can actually start to fill this out because you've gone through all of the exercises to collect this information, right? So obviously where we're going to start is you're going to say your name and what you're running for. I know it's so easy to forget that part. And it's also easy to forget if somebody introduces you, that you still need to say it again. So say it and then tell your stories and then say it again at the very end. You're going to see that it's on here twice. You want to finish by thanking everybody and stating your name and what you're running for a second time. Typically, that is the only thing that they will remember. And if you don't say it and you've given your speech and you don't say your name again, if they love your speech, they're like, I missed who that was. They walk away and they're like, I like that person, but I have no idea who it was. So always make sure you say it again at the second, on the end of the speech. So you always want to introduce your stump speech by thanking whoever invited you to give them the arena in the first place. So if you are in front of, a group or at a house party or at an event, please spend a moment to thank whoever asked you to speak or is hosting, or anybody who's of importance that actually gave you the opportunity to share who you are. You're going to be sharing your stories here, right? So the story of who you are, why you're the best person for the job, your policy stances. This is connected to the story of self. This is where you can actually tell the stories of how the policy stances that you care about and will fight for are connected to real people in your community. Make that connection from the me to the we. Bring your constituent stories in to those values. And then you want to bring at the end of your conversation here that concrete call to action. If you're asking them to vote for you, make sure you tell them when your election day is and where and when they can vote, right? If it's a community with a lot of different polling places and they need to look it up, you can say, if you're not sure how to vote for me, go to my website and make sure you put that information on your website. Brenda Short is just nodding uncontrollably because I'm sure many people were like, what the heck is ranked choice voting? I've never heard of that before. We have ranked choice in the town over from mine, and I worked on a race that used that last year, and that's what we got a lot, was just how the heck do I even do this on this ballot? You may want to put up like an actual video of how to do it, you know? If you're asking for money, you want to ask for a dollar amount. If you don't ask for a dollar amount, you're not actually asking for money. So make sure you tell them a dollar amount and how they can give to you, either by check or if you're using Act Blue or something like that, to give a donation by website. Make sure that you have a way for them to go there. I know candidates who have a business card and it actually has on the back a QR code for their donation site. Because if you're saying to people, please give to me, you can actually just give them the QR code and they can snap it with their phone right there. And they'll have the website. And then if you're asking people to volunteer, make sure that you have a hard ask of when and where or how they can register for a shift. So, you know, I need you to volunteer with the campaign because I can't talk to every voter in this district. It's just too big. Can you come and help us talk to your neighbors this Saturday? Or you can go to, you know, elainealmquist.com/volunteer. And that's where you can find out all the opportunities to pitch into this campaign so that we can win. Right? So make sure your calls to action are concrete. And then again, thank your audience, state your name and office again. And I want to open it up to questions right now. And then I think I get to perform these last two pieces after that. Who has questions? What questions do you have?
I don't have any questions, just thank you. That really absolutely helped, especially how I was telling you, I'm a little, you know, ambiguous about saying certain things, but I think it helped you describing how to do it, you know, now to sandwich it or, you know, however, and creating the template for your story and doing several of those. That's a great idea. That's so helpful.
The story of self, I cannot take credit for. It was developed by the wonderful campaign organizer, Marshall Gans, who his family were Holocaust survivors. And he went on to, he grew up in the US and he joined the civil rights movements and has been fighting for Black abolition for years. And he actually is a neighbor here in Massachusetts and teaches at Harvard. So I have the great honor of running into him every once in a while, but that is a foundational piece of how almost all campaigns in the US write their stories now. So
it's so helpful though, because there's so many aspects of this. And like I said, you know, the hardest thing I've had, especially putting my story together, is I've done so many things. How do I put it all into one thing? How do I condense it? And how do I make it sound like, oh, I did all this, you know what I mean? I'm not trying here to brag. It's just, these are the things I did, you know, so I can use those though as, you know, concrete evidence of me being in the community and actually serving instead of, oh, I was here, I was there, because that's, you know, you see people do that all the time.
Showing and not telling is very powerful. And I'm sorry, I don't know what happened to Egypt, but she was talking earlier about how powerful, and that is why we do these exercises, right? Is ultimately on a campaign, you're going to have to talk to so many people, whether it's a tiny race or a few moments to connect with the people that we need. And so making sure that that moment is really efficient, make it is so important. And I know that all of you have incredible stories that should go get that book to download so that I can read it.
It's not a great story. It's not a great story. Trust me. It's not a great
I'm
story.
very interested to know what's going to be
I have
in
a
there.
signed copy by the owner of the author too, because I didn't know my husband sold our story, but he did. So
well,
do you want the brief introduction of the story?
Why not?
Okay, so the book is written by a gentleman named James. I forgot his last name. I have the book right there, but two men who were gay and they wanted to have children with women because they wanted to continue their life, you know, their manhood. They wanted to have children, but to have physical, biological children, they chose to marry these women even though they were actually gay. And my story is in there. And I didn't even know that my husband sold the story because it was after our divorce. And somebody said, Brenda, this man was telling your story. And I think it was my sister, my older sister, was like, Brenda, we have to get this book. We got the book. We read the story. He said he changed names in it, but my story has my physical name in it. Like literally it has my first name in it. And I end up reaching out to a lawyer because this book blew up after Oprah Winfrey put it on her, on her list.
Remember that. Mhm.
And
I'm so
I
sorry.
end up getting money for it. They settled with me. I end up getting money for it.
Wow.
And then I sued my husband because even though it was your story, it was also
It
my
was your
story.
story.
Yeah.
X. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Whoa.
Elaine,
Yeah, but it's a great story. Don't get me wrong.
You are the woman with 9 lives.
Right. Right. My kids say
Yeah.
the same thing.
Your stories, the ones that you actually give us permission to know about. I do. That's all the time I have with you today. I want to just say a couple last closing things. It's been an absolute pleasure to be able to be here with all of you. Karen, Catherine, thank you for allowing me to interact with all of you today. I hope that this was helpful. This does not have to be the last time that we talk if you don't want it to be. I think that Karen and Catherine, would you be willing to just share my contact info?
absolutely. And so what we're doing is sharing the videos, posting the videos of each cohort. So,
Great. So I want you all to know that my website is almquistandassociates.com. That is my consulting firm. You can learn more about what we do there. My email address is elaine@almquistandassociates, all spelled out.com. I am the easiest person on the internet to find. If you Google my name, you'll find me on Twitter, Instagram, all the places. I am an inbound person. And I absolutely love helping, especially women run for office. If you decide that you have your stump speech finished and you want another pair of eyes on it, I would be so happy and glad to look it over with you for final feedback. If you feel like you just want regular old campaign advice, I do a free confidential complimentary 90-minute listening session with any woman who's running for office who's Democrat or left. And please take advantage of my time. People pay me a lot of money for it, and I would love to give it to you for free. So thank you for having me. I'm really always excited to get these opportunities to help folks like you. So
Elaine, thank you
Thank
so
you.
very, very much.
my pleasure.
It was just a wealth of information, and we gained a lot from your expertise, and thank you a million times over.
I'm very happy to hear that.
And
All right.
Elaine, you're bringing back memories because when you said that you were down the street from Harvard, I lived in Boston years ago.
Yeah. What part?
Well, I was at Boston University.
Okay. Great. I mean, it is my hometown and I love it dearly. I keep leaving and coming back because I just love it here so much. So. All right. It's been wonderful.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.